good day everyone. We are done with the introduction to materials development. So let us move to the current trends and issues. So let's move on to the current trends and issues in materials development. So what should drive materials? The needs and wants of the learners should drive the materials, but teachers have needs and wants to be satisfied too. And pseudo administrators with their concerns for standardization and conformity with. These needs and wants are not irreconcilable, and they can best be satisfied by localized projects which consult learners, teachers, and administrators before, during, and after the materials writing process. Next. So, what are the issues in materials development? The other issues which have received attention in the literature. First, first issue is, do learners need a course book? In the 80s, all right, 1981 put forward arguments against ways in which textbook deliver materials, and O'Neill responded with the defense of the course book. Since then, there has been continual debate about whether learners benefit from course books or not. Opponents have argued that the course book benefits administrators and teachers without catering for the needs and wants of the learners. So that is used mainly to impose control and order, and that is superficial and reductionist in its coverage of points in its provision of language experience. It imposes uniformity of syllabus and approach, and it removes initiative and power from teachers. So proponents have countered that the course books is a cost-effective way of providing security, system, progress, and revision for the learner, that it saves teachers time and provides them with a secure base, and that it helps administrators achieve credibility and standardization. So, second, do learners need published materials at all? In recent years, there has been a move away from using published materials, with institutions throughout the world developing their own locally relevant materials. And with Meddings and Turnberry in 2009 proposing the DOM ELT movement, which advocates learner-centered materials light approaches, and yet surveys by the British Council in 2008 and Tomlinson 2010 show that most teachers continue to use commercially published materials, even though many do so with compulsion or reluctance. So next, should materials be learning or acquisition focused? Most published materials focus on conscious learning of language points, but many researchers argue that the learners should be provided with many more opportunities to acquire language informally from exposure to language in use. Should materials cater for learner expectation or try to change them? So traditionally, it has been argued that it is important to provide learners with that they expect or else risk rejection of the materials. Recently, though, researchers example of this is the Tomlinson 2005 have pointed out that it is teachers rather than learners who are resistant to change, and that learners often welcome innovative approaches which have the potential to engage them. So next is, should materials be driven by syllabus needs, learner needs, or market needs? So most published materials are inevitably driven by perceived market needs, but many large institutions are beginning to publish their own materials because of the mismatch between the courses available and their local institutional needs. By it, Tomlinson 2012. And many researchers are arguing that learners are suffering because courses are designed primarily to appeal to the administrators and teachers who are responsible for buying them. Should published materials be censored? So it is common practice for publishers to censor materials to make sure that they do not give offense or cause embarrassment. Okay, next. Should materials be driven by the theory or practice? Reviews of ELT course books by Tomlinson, etc. 2001 reveal that course book writers are much more influenced by what is conventional practice than the theories of language practice or even by classroom research. In some ways, this is a vicious circle as publishers continue to produce courses with face validity, which they know will sell. So Tomlinson understands the publisher's reluctance to change but argues that the learners are being disadvantaged by the failure of course book writers to apply even such basis theories of second language acquisition or SLA, as the necessity for exposure to language in use and for opportunity to use language for communication. So, should materials aim for language development only, or should they also aim for personal and educational development? Many language teachers argue that it is their job to help the learners to acquire language and that they are not responsible for their educational development. So others argue that it is language learners are situated in an educational establishment, then their teacher's main responsibility is to help them to develop. And others argue that not only are personal and educational development main objectives of any language course, but that the achievement of these objectives actually facilitates the acquisition of language too. Next, should materials aim to contribute to teachers' development as well as the language learning? All teachers need frequent stimulus and refreshment if they are not too fossilized. So, most teachers have very few opportunities for personal and professional development, though, and many researchers are now arguing that published materials should aim to help teachers to develop by involving them in, for example, making principled decisions about which texts and tasks to use and how to use them to the best advantage of their learners. So, let's move on. We are done with the issues in the materials development. So, we are now I will discuss to you the current trends in materials development. So in the first edition of the Book of Tomlinson 2003, he claimed that it is arguable that there is nothing much new going on in materials development. and that in the area of commercially produced materials, there is even a sort of principle going back. So, this is justified by publishers by reference to their confidential research into what learners and teachers want. Example, the return to the centrality of grammar highlighted in Tomlinson 2001. But in his view, it is almost certainly driven by economic constraints and the ever increasing costs of producing the sort of multicolored, multi-component coursebook which seems to attract the biggest sale these days. So now we have the positive trends in the materials development. There are some materials requiring investment by the learners in order for them to make discoveries for themselves from analysis of sample of language and use. So, example, McCarthy et al. 2006, Bradfield and Letter B 2011, Clare and Wilson 2011. Unfortunately, though most of the current course books inviting discovery, just ask the learners to find predetermined answers rather than to make unexpected discoveries of their own. There are more materials making use of corpus data reflecting actual language use. Example, McCarthy et al. 2006. However, as Timis in 2013 points out, there are still many coursebooks which deliberately do not make any use of corpora at all. Example, this is Dellar and Walkley 2005. There are more extensive reader series being produced with fewer linguistic constraints and more provocative content. Example, Meili 2008, Meili in Prose 2013. But as Meili in Prose 2013 point out, there has also been a disturbing trend for publishers to add comprehension questions to their extensive readers, thus ironically promoting extensive reading. There has been a very noticeable and welcome increase in attempts to personalize the learning process by getting learners to relate topics and texts to their own lives, views, and feelings. Example, this is Clanfield and Ben 2010, Bradfield and Letter B 2011, Clare and Wilson 2011. There is an increase in attempts to gain the effective engagement of learners, Tomlinson 2010 and 2011, by involving them in tasks which encourage the expression of feelings, but there has also been a decline in the number of texts likely to stimulate effective engagement. There is an increasing use of the internet as a source of current, relevant, and appealing text. For information about and examples of this trend, see Kervin and Deriwenka 2011. There is evidence of a movement away from spoken practice of reading grammar and towards of spoken grammar in use. Next, there is a considerable increase in the number of ministries. So, we will going to tackle about the negative trends of the materials development. So first, there is an even more pronounced return to the central place of grammar and the language curriculum. So Source and Source 1996, which contradicts the confidential research for a British publisher revealed about the needs and wants of learners and teachers, and which goes against many of the findings of second language acquisition. Second, there is still a far greater prominence given in course books to listening and speaking than to reading and writing. Third, there is an assumption that most learners have short attention spans, can only can only cope with very short reading and writing text, and will only engage in activities for a short time. There seems to be an assumption that learners do not want and would not gain from intellectually demanding activities while engaged in language learning. So there is a neglect or something an abuse of literature and course books. Despite its potential as a source of stimulating and engaging text, and despite the many claims of methodologies for the potential value and appeal of literature, there is a continuing predominance of analytical activities and a neglect of activities which could cater for learners with other preferred learning styles. There is still an absence of controversial issues to stimulate thought, to provide opportunities for exchanges of views, and to make topic content meaningful. There is a tendency to underestimate learners linguistically, intellectually, and emotionally. Despite the increase in publication, reflecting the predominant use of international English as a lingua franca, most course book still focus on English as used by native speakers and prepare the learners for interaction with them. So that's it. We are done with the issues and trends of the materials development. Thank you for your listening.